Welcome, panelists. So good to see all of you today. And again, thank you. Thank you so much for being here. So before we get started, what I'd like to do is I would like to have you panelists, please say who you are, your tribal affiliation, and where you are located, and in anything else that you would like to share. So let's start out with Cary.
Thanks, Lenny. I'm Cary, Waubanascum, Wapanoso Nyungyats, Waganyuntani, Wagitaloda, Onyotiaga, Ni Wagahunjoda, Okale, Menominee, Potawatomi, Stockbridge. I just shared with you my Menominee name. I'm mixed tribes. I'm 4 different tribes, and I spoke in Oneida. So my clan in Oneida is Turtle, and Oneida, Menominee, Potawatomi, and Stockbridge. And I live in Oneida, Wisconsin, but the original homelands of the Menominee. And that's where I'm from. I'm joining you from UW Green Bay, where I work and live here with my family. So good to be here with you all.
Thank you, Cary. Lisa.
Pujukinoa, Sagamakwa Indigo, Ojibwe Mong, Migizi Nadodame, Mashkizi being Nadunjaba. My name is Lisa. I am Eagle Clan. I am from the Bad River Ojibwe Reservation in northern Wisconsin that I hear is currently covered in snow. But I currently live here in Missoula, Montana, and I have 3 children, ages 22, 17, and 13, and 2 identify as 2Spirit. Miigwech.
Thank you, Lisa. Angie.
Good morning. Mishkobanishi Kwe, Indigenous Cause, Mako Indo Dame, Animo Zibing Indunjiba. My name is Angie, Bear Clan, and I'm from the Lake Manitoba First Nation, and also Ojibwe. We're Ojibwe, and I live in Minneapolis currently with my husband, and between us we have 7 kids, and 2 of them identify.
Thank you, Angie. Georgette.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Georgette Christensen. I am from the White Earth Reservation in northern Minnesota. I'm Bear Clan. I live in Apple Valley. I have 3 children. I have 24-year-old twins, and our youngest is 18, and 2 of them identify. And I'm coming to you from St. Paul, where I work.
Thank you, Georgette. Again, thank you so much for all you panelists that have agreed to be here today. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask a group of questions. And again, I'll call out your name. And then you can answer the question and add on anything else that you would like. Again, this is a discussion. This is, really wanting to educate and bring awareness to our people across Indian country who work with youth who may identify. And, and I'm just, again, I just want to say how happy I'm here, you all. I'm happy that you all are here today. So with that, I'm going to start out with Cary first. And please, any of the other panelists, if you need me to repeat the question, please let me know. So Cary, how does your child identify? What were some of your struggles and challenges as a parent when your child came out to you? What were some of your fears?
Thank you, Lenny. My son's name is Dehadun Hahelahau. It means he is bringing happiness in Oneida. And he's 20 years old. He identifies as transgender and 2Spirit. He lives in Minneapolis. He goes to the Minneapolis College of Art and Design, where he's a junior, and he's doing amazing. I'm really proud of him. We are very close. I think we've been close our whole life, for his whole life. Like we've always been super close. I think we got closer after he told me that he identifies as transgender, and it didn't happen until after we moved to the Twin Cities. We moved to Twin Cities in 2016 and just moved back home last year because where we lived in Oneida, they didn't talk about it in school. But I always knew that my son was unique in pushing against the gender norms, the colonial gender system, because from a very young age, all his clothes came from the boy department, you know? And so I just went with it. But some of the challenges that came when he told us, and it was like in late 2016, early 2017 that he told us, like I felt like I already knew on some level, I just didn't know exactly, but some of the challenges that we faced were you know, explaining to other family members and other family members not understanding or misgendering him, naming him. And I understand, like, we're humans, we make mistakes, but there were a few instances where I don't think people were really trying. And so I just know from my son that being dead named and misgendered was very hard to take. It's he kind of described it like a stab wound every time it happens. Other fears I had, well, I don't know about fears, but just thoughts that rolled through my head that, you know, Lenny, you helped me through sitting at Caribou, thinking about, you know, relationships. You know, he expressed that he experienced discrimination within the LGBTQ community as far as being identifying as transgender, and people telling, well, I don't date transgender people, you know, that kind of thing. And so the fear of his well-being, overall well-being. And COVID exacerbated that because, you know, going through the surgery, the process and stuff, that was put on delay, and that really, really impacted him. And so I had great fears around his mental health. There was the time during 2020 that it got pretty rough. And so, you know, I think back about it and like, I'm just so grateful that we were so close, because I think if we weren't, or if I had in any way gave him the impression that I wasn't accepting of him, that things could have probably turned out really badly. And because we're really close, and because I was, when he told me, like, there was no doubt, there was no questioning, there was no, like, it was me, I was like, it was like 100% love, support, everything. And it was immediate. That's what it took for me and him and our relationship, for us to continue our close relationship. And I think for us, in our experience, if it were any other way, I think that, you know, things could have turned a different way, because it got pretty bad. Kind of like, you know, thinking about future, you know, he does still kind of like have a hard time finding people to connect with. Again, COVID, he started MCAT over there during COVID, so that was hard. But he, you know, every time he says he makes a new friend or something, I'm really happy. And so, yeah, it's just, there's a lot of things that I think, things that we had to use. And I have to tell you a quick little story too. Like, it was the young people, like my daughter Shiloh was 6, turning 6. And she would be the corrector. If we made a slip, she'd be like, it's he, it's, you know, and she would correct us on the name and the gender and anybody. She was fearless. She's like, this is my brother. And she renamed him brother. And so it was the young ones who really just got it right away. And to me, it signified how close our young ones are still to the creator's world. They're coming fresh out of the creator's world. And so they're still so connected. And yeah, so we're working on that. It's mostly the relationship thing right now. You know, and people, now I'm getting into the age of being my peers are grandparents, you know, I'm in my mid 40s, and, you know, I'm not in a rush, but like, there's ways that people we're talking about family. What does family mean? It's like how we define family. That's what family is. And so I've gotten to that point, but there was a time when I was kind of thinking about like, oh, worried, like, how is he going to have a family, you know, like, but then now I'm in a better place with that. Thank you, Lenny, for talking through those things with me and helping me take care of myself too, is going through these and telling me that it's okay to feel this kind of stuff. But one other thing too, I never put this on my son. Any fears or things I had, I brought them somewhere else, like to Lenny or my husband or somebody. I would never share them with my son. So thank you.
Thank you, Cary. Lisa.
So the first child who came out to me was my son. He's now 17. I'm a social worker, so I often make my children watch a lot of things. We were actually watching the first interview when Caitlyn Jenner came out, and we watched the interview. And then that's when my son said, "Mom, I have something to tell you." So we went outside, sat on the porch, and he first came out as trans. And we, at the time, we just lived in a very conservative community in Wisconsin. And I guess that was my biggest fear, was how to navigate that with him. And just as, you know, I assured him, like, he's my baby, like, this is how creator made him, and he's our gift, and we absolutely love him, and it changes nothing. We had like a lot of struggles with the school. He had a lot of struggles with his peer group. He had, you know, before he came out, he was with like very like boys who played football, and once they had heard, their relationships changed drastically. So I think, and our adult relationships changed drastically too, because I don't think a lot of parents knew how to accept or support. So I feel like on both ends, my child and my husband and I as parents, we all went through like loneliness and isolation and fear in knowing how to protect our child, because he started just going through like a real deep depression because he was getting physically assaulted at school. There was a lot of bullying that was going on. And eventually he had shared with me that he was having suicidal thoughts. So that was very scary, that my beautiful child, I can lose him because others can accept him. And that was very hard. And I'm sorry I'm getting emotional. We're in such a good place now, to where when my youngest child came out, just we have been through like so much and have gotten like pretty comfortable and sassy, and you know where we are, who we are. And for those relationships lost, I mean, if someone can't accept my child, they don't need to be in our lives. So when she came out, it was just a lot smoother, and she's quite a little firecracker, and she's quite very proud, and she's just, it was a lot different experience than with our son. And I think too, a lot of what my son and husband went through, because he was our only male child, he was really worried about his relationship with his father, because my husband, when he was in college, he played for the college football team. And I think my son had it in his mind that he had to be like a boy's boy to have my husband's acceptance. And I think sometimes we still kind of go through those paces, whereas my husband just has to constantly reassure him, we love you, you be you. And my husband constantly tells my son, like, you don't have to live my life, or you don't have to do certain things to make me proud, because I'm proud of you as you are. And that he just constantly validates that our son needs to be who he is, and we're going to support that 100%. Miigwech.
Thank you, Lisa. Oh, I almost got emotional. but thank you. Angie.
So I'm going to be the panelist to ask you to ask a question again.
All right, no problem. So, how does your child identify? What were some of your struggles and challenges as a parent when your child came out to you? What were some of your fears?
Okay, so we've done this panel previously, and I have two. So we have Blue, and she identifies as Two-Spirit, but then I also have Sky, who also identifies as Two-Spirit. And I kept my conversation with Blue because she is involved in the youth side. So I just kept it with her, but she said, remember about Sky, and of course, so I'm going to talk about her. And so I make mistakes. So that's number one. I still make mistakes. And I think one of the biggest fears I've had just since they've come out is they have a really strained, I shouldn't say strained relationship, because they have a very good relationship with their dad's side. But they are very Christian and aren't very accepting of Two-Spirit. Well, they say they are, but in practice, really, they're not. And they, so Sky and Blue, it's hard for me to support. My fear is that their relationship with their dad and the family will be hurt because of them not being as accepting as we'd like them to be. And so it's been a lot of talking through with them about, their dad's family is not the only place this happens, right? And then just kind of talking through how frustrating it is that people aren't open, and how it hurts more when it's your family. But so far they're okay. And me talking to their dad about things that I've observed or heard, has, I think, helped at least their dad be, kind of shield them a little bit from the people that can't be really changed or don't want to be, and how they talk about Two-Spirit. So it's mostly, and the other thing that's been a struggle is and I think this is also contributing to, their dad's side not being as open, is at least Blue. Sky identifies as, she, her still, and Two-Spirit. And Blue is they, them to everybody except for the family. And, talking with Blue about, if you want to be they, them, I will call you they, them. I want to call you however you want to be called. But they just say, well, my family, I'll have family call me she, her. And so if I call her they, them, she'll say, Mom, I want you to call, she, her. And then to other people who know Blue as they, them, they'll hear me saying she, her, and then they kind of come after me like I'm insensitive and not calling her the right thing. And Blue sometimes will have to come to my defense, but it just gets tough because they're, they'll say, no, it's they, them, could be like trying to be intentional about not calling Blue the right thing. But that's been, I think, the biggest struggle, but I'm just going with whatever Blue tells me. I'm following Blue's example and telling Blue, just bring me along, and I'm a willing participant and supporter. of you. So whatever you want from me.
Thank you, Angie. Georgette.
Good morning, everyone. Yeah, listening to all three moms' stories, I have a lot of similarities. As I said in the beginning, I have three children, three daughters. My two oldest are twins, and my oldest of the twins by a minute came out probably when she was 17. Her and her sister came to me one day after work, and they're like, "Mom, we have to talk to you." And I'm like, I had a day of meetings. I was tired, and I was like, okay, we can do this. So they said, "What day is today?" And I'm like, it was like Thursday, whatever month, whatever day. They're like, "No, Mom, what day is today?" And I'm like, I don't know. And I hadn't been on Facebook or anything like that day. And they're like, "It's National Coming Out Day." And I said, "Oh, okay, yeah." Excuse me. And then I was like, "Oh." And I was looking at them. I'd look at each of them in their eyes. And my daughter, Tyler, said, "Yeah." I said, "Okay." I said, "Thanks for telling me." And she burst into tears. And then of course I burst into tears, right? And I said, "Come sit by me." And I held her and I loved her, and I said, "It's okay. Your dad and I will love you no matter what. We're always in your corner. It'll be okay." My biggest fear was, immediately when she told me, my biggest fear was, how is this world going to treat her? What is she going to go through? Yeah, and I still get emotional talking about it because my kids are my world. I'm in my best place. I'm my best person when my kids are with me, when I'm with my kids. And so life goes on. And then after a while, she came and said to her dad and I, "Do you remember you said we could always come to you and talk to you about anything?" And I said, Yep, that's right." And she said, "I've been using drugs and alcohol and I can't quit." I said, "Okay." I said, "Thanks for telling us." I said, "We will set up a Rule 25, a chemical health assessment." And she knew exactly where she wanted to go because friends of hers from school had gone there. She wanted to go to Hazleton. So that's where we went. We did her Rule 25. And Lisa, I believe it was you, had talked about, I met with the assessor to go through the assessment of Tyler, and Tyler had a suicide plan. And I swear, the world stopped and I heard nothing but white noise, and the assessor's still going on, right, talking about the results. And I'm like, stop. You need to stop right now. And depression had taken over for Tyler at that time. And I was like, she's like, "What do you want? What do you need to back up to?" I said, you can't just drop that on me that my child had a suicide plan and expect me just to walk through it like it was nothing. This is my child. So then we finished that, and Tyler went into treatment and was there 90 days. And then Hazleton has a step down sober living program that she went through, I think maybe 3 months. And then she did such an incredible job while she was in sober living with working her AA, her her commitment to being sober, that they hired her in the sober living programs. And so she has been working in the chemical health field and still is today. Just got a promotion to a supervisor position. And probably, I mean, the facility she works with is probably one of the top largest facilities, in the Twin Cities for placing people. Couple years after that is when she told me, probably 3 years ago, she told me that she was going to start taking hormones, taking testosterone, because she was identifying as a man. And I said, okay. I mean, again, when it was just the two of us, when he told me, and of course I started crying, because the hardest part for me, and it wasn't a scare, the hardest adjustment was losing my daughter, but I now have a son, right? And we talked about this at the last panel about all of my pictures are of Tyler as a girl, that I need to take new pictures. But he said, why are you crying? I said, you need to give me some space and some time too, because this is a transition for me. I'm losing you as my daughter, but I'm gaining a son. I always wanted a son. Now I got a son. But it has been a hard transition. And even today, I will come across a picture of when she was in Gulf or high school or when they were little girls, and I will burst into tears because it's like, okay, that's my daughter, Tyler, but I have my son, Tyler now. And Tyler has made me a grandma. Him and his girlfriend did in vitro, and I have this incredible, spunky, sassy granddaughter who is the world. I mean, you think you love your kids. I mean, wait till you have grandchildren. You go absolutely crazy. But yeah, I guess, for parents out there and advocates and people that are working in the community is let them create that safe space for them to talk about their questions, or if they know who they are and they're ready to say, this is who I am, create that safe space for them and just to love them and to let them know that they are truly a gift from Creator. Yeah, I've and as I said before, I had two that identify, but my other twin, I haven't really talked with her about it, but she's kind of more or less told me, but we just haven't had that conversation yet. But again, taking her lead, right? I'm not pushing the fact. So yeah, I guess, did I answer all the questions? I think that's it, Lenny.
Thank you, Georgette. And again, thank you all to you panelists for allowing yourselves to be really vulnerable and also just having these conversations, because it's really difficult, right? I know one of the things, I think a lot of you know that I've went across Indian country doing a lot of trainings on 2Spirit Native LGBTQ issues. And one of the things that I have seen in all the communities that I've gone into is that a lot of parents really struggle with their youth who identify because they see the mental health issues, right? A lot of our children suffer from depression. They suffer from anxiety, just wanting to be accepted. A lot of them are being bullied. And one of the things that I'm always reminding people, and I remind people in a good way, but it's reality, our children should not be killing themselves because of how they identify. When we know that before colonization, our children who came out in some tribal communities, they actually had celebrations and ceremonies for these children, right? And what we know of is that the individuals who identified also played special roles in community. right? As name givers, as healers, as you know, just to name a few. But the reality of it is that colonization has really changed our view in how we look at this population. And so not only am I, but I have colleagues across the Indian country who also identify, and we're working to create change in our tribal communities and just get that understanding, and also to really address the issues that are happening in our community. Like, we don't talk about missing and murdered Two-Spirit people, right? Nor do we talk about trafficking of our community members, especially our youth. So again, we're all working together to really address the issues that's happening with the community. But also, one more thing that I want to say too is that I will often tell tribal communities that before colonization, our individuals who identified were looked upon as spiritual beings. And it's because of the roles that we played in community before colonization. Today, we're looked upon as sexual beings, meaning that people are more looking at who we sleep with, right? But one of the things I always like to say this quote, because people have this misunderstanding about gender and sexual orientation. So one of the things that I've learned, and to help people to understand the difference between gender and sexual orientation, is gender is who you go to sleep as, who you wake up as. Sexual orientation is who you sleep with. There's a difference, right? Gender is who you are. Sexual orientation is who you're sexually attracted to. So again, I mean, we're still having to educate our communities a lot. And I'm just really glad that you guys were, you panelists are willing just to talk about some of the struggles and challenges that your child have gone through in regards to mental health issues, because it's important that we address those things. The other thing too that I'm really happy that you also talked about too is that own sort of grief that you have all gone through, right? For instance, you know, Georgette, Cary, talking about when your child transitioned, and also the fact that you had to work through your own grief, right? And it's okay. But often, sometimes as parents, we forget to work through our own grief also, because we're so worried about our child and how the world is going to respond to your child, right? So I've always encouraged parents to always sort of think in that way. It's okay to grieve. It's okay to work through this, right? And also just the importance of just that understanding that when you do have a child that's transitioning, yes, you may be losing a son or a daughter, but you're also gaining a son or daughter, right? And that often sometimes even like parents will say, well, what about grandchildren, right? But then I always remind the parents, your child can adopt. Your child can bring a child in many, many different directions. So we're always thinking just one way, right? So we need to think bigger. So again, I just want to thank you all. Did you all? What happened? I muted myself. So I was going to say, do you guys want to follow up with anything before we move on? Again, we're having discussion today.
Yeah, I would like to, you know, when Georgette mentioned pictures, that just resonated with me because, you know, I have to think back, and I didn't do everything perfect and I didn't do everything right. You know, I left pictures up and my son didn't tell me for a while, and it hurt him that I left pictures up. And then I start noticing he would tape pieces of paper over himself on the pictures hanging in the living room. And then I'm like, oh, okay, let me take those down. But I hurt him. You know, there's things that I did that hurt him. And he's on the youth panel side, so he might talk about that. And you know, we moved, I stopped whenever. Now I'm just like, tell me if something, you know, tell me, like, and I'll stop doing it. Like, I'll take the pictures down, I'll take new pictures. We do have, you know, with our cell phones, we have thousands of new pictures, you know. But I just want to acknowledge that too, in case anybody has heard my son's story, because he has a completely different perspective with how things went down. And I acknowledge and I take responsibility for any hurts that I have caused him. And you know, obviously unknowingly, I don't want to hurt him. But we're at a place right now where, you know, he tells me and then I apologize. I didn't get apologized to as a kid, you know, we come from a different generation, but I saw a meme come through social media a couple weeks ago. Apology is a normal thing in our house. You know, we apologize together and we change when we, you know, acknowledge it, and then we don't do that behavior anymore, or we try not to. And so it's just a shifting of the way that we're doing things and being in relationship with each other, I think. You're muted, Lenny.
Don't you just love Zoom? We should be used to this, right? Lisa or Georgette or Angie, did you have any follow-up to this discussion before we move on?
So Angie had said something earlier that also resonated with me when she talked about following Blue's example. And I think that as a parent is what my husband and I most learned. When I first started talking, I did mention that when my son did come out, he let us know he was trans. But the thing that I have learned, and especially from Lenny, is that identity can change and it's fluid and it evolves to where now he identifies as being gay. But it's just really important, you know, as Angie said, we follow our child's example because it changes. And with my daughter, it just seems like every week she has a new category or a new term. We just have her educate us and tell us who she is, and it's awesome. So.
Thank you, Lisa. Anyone else?
Yeah, one thing just to add is when Blue first came out, Blue came out as bisexual, but Blue wasn't bisexual, is what she eventually told me, but she thought that was safer. It was mostly safer with her peers to be considered bisexual than as a lesbian. And so that changed too because of how comfortable she was with herself and telling other people.
And I'm glad that you brought that up, because that's like when I work with parents who have children who are coming out, that's one of the things that I usually tell parents. Don't be surprised if one day your child says, oh, I think I'm bisexual, and then the next day says, I think I'm transgender. And most of the time what happens is that even as parents, even as social workers, or even family members, I mean, we suggest putting them into therapy, right? When there's really nothing wrong with them. So we as adults, we as parents, we as community members, what we need to do is sort of accept that when a child does those things, they're just exploring their identity, and we need to be comfortable with it. We don't need to think that they need to go into therapy, you know, whatever, unless your child comes to you and says, you know, I'm suffering from depression, I'm suffering from anxiety, I'm having these thoughts of suicide, you know, it's important then. But again, as parents and adults in community, we need to educate ourselves, right? We need to understand. And again, I love that you all are saying, you know, you need to let the child lead, right? You need to let them teach you, right? Because I always say, as adults, we always assume that we think, we know every time what a child needs, right? Sometimes we need to listen to them, and we need to ask them, like, what do you need? How could I help you, right? So again, just thank you. Georgette, did you have anything you want to follow up with before we move on?
Yeah, I guess, you know, talking about mental health, I'm also a social worker. And
oh, social workers.
You know, the whole identity, coming out with their identity and exploring that and, adjusting, handling that for them is one thing. But I think when, we have mental health issues that kind of follow behind that, that depression. I don't think I've met a kid nowadays that doesn't have some level of anxiety, panic disorder. There's a lot of other reasons why that mental health issue stuff creeps in. Grief, just from your own family loss or friends committing suicide kind of thing. So, as a parent, also realize and know and accept that it's okay to say to your child, do you need to talk to somebody about that? Because they don't always want to talk to us, right? And I get it. But even as parents, it's okay for us to go and talk to somebody, to go to find a therapist. It doesn't have to be forever. It doesn't mean there's anything wrong. It's about getting that neutral stance, right? That neutral, have you thought about this? Have you tried this? It's that third person that can walk you through some of that stuff. I have found therapy to be extremely helpful in my own personal life. With my adult children now, I've had some trials just with them growing up and becoming adults, right? Live and learn. But just know that you also have to deal with that mental health stuff that comes along with not just the identity issue, but maybe going to school, or maybe just having too many friends committing suicide, or knowing people are drinking and doing things that are bad for them, and they worry about their friends and family. That don't lose sight of that piece also. That's really important for our kids to know that they don't have to carry that. I also think a lot of our kids carry stuff that we adults carry. Our kids are becoming parentified. And that's not fair, to our kids to carry all that kind of stuff, because I think just with technology nowadays, there's just so much more that they have to deal with that I never dealt with at their age. So that's all.
All right. Thank you. Thank you. Oh, that mute button don't like me. One of the things that I want to stress too, because I am a mental health provider, I've worked with youth and adults and families of individuals who identify. But one of the things that I think about as a mental health provider is that I don't focus on the diagnosis, because that's the way the Western healing or the Western perspective has taught me to do, right? So as a mental health provider, and what I'm happy about is that I'm my own private practice, so I get to do things the way that I want, that I feel is important in working with people. But the thing that I always say is that I focus on the symptom. What created the diagnosis? It could be these young people that are being bullied, ostracized by family members, by community, by their peers. When those things happen, that's when our children struggle with these diagnoses, right? So that's really like something to really think about. When I've worked with youth who have identified, my way of working with them was either do walk and talk therapy, but one of the things that I didn't focus on with them when it came to depression, but was like educating them about their identity. Like I remember one time I told a boy, I said, you know what, someday you're going to grow up, and how you identify, you're going to help your people. You may be a doctor, you may be a nurse, you may be a lawyer, or you may be even someone who may pour water in the sweat lodge. That's the role you're going to play as that individual, as who you are, right? So again, that's always been like a helpful thing for me when I work with young people. And then I may have a child who may identify as gender fluid, right? So there's a lot of these terms that we have to learn, right? And so like one of the things that so if I have a child who identifies as gender fluid, who may one day say, oh, I think I'm a male, and then the next day say, oh, I think I'm female, be okay with that. Like I remember working with a young boy who identified and so I would say to him when he would come to a session, well, who are we today? So he was comfortable in who he identified as. He had a female name, right? And if he used that female name, if that's how he identified today, then I would identify that as who he wants to be, right? It wasn't about me, it was about him, right? So, I mean, I identified. So, but what I'm saying is, like, for us as adults, we need to challenge our biases, right? That's the number one thing we should do, is challenge our own biases. If we think badly about an individual identifies, we're not going to provide the proper services to these children, or even our own children, right? So those are a lot of things to think about. So I'll get off that bandwagon. We'll move on to the next. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to break these questions up. I know there was a lot. So, as speaking as a community, how do we help our youth who identify as Two-Spirit or Native LGBTQ? How can we better serve these youth as a community? And how do we create safety for these youth? So again, if you need me to repeat the questions, please let me know, okay? So we'll start out with Cary.
Thanks, Lenny. So thinking about community. So like I said, my son, I raised my son in Oneida, went to our tribal school and everything, and we moved to the Twin Cities in 2016. And like I said, before 2016, there wasn't any community events related to anything Two-Spirit or LGBT or anything that we knew of anyway. There were no education, there was nothing regarding education. So even my son will say today that like you get sex ed in school, it's just totally narrow, like, very binary, and even him, he was critiquing that at a very young age, the sexual education he received in school. And so he has a lot to say about that. But when we left and then we go to the Twin Cities, and there was a lot, I'm sorry, I'm getting a call. I never get calls on here. But anyway, we go to the Twin Cities, and it's very different. People are talking about it. There's programming in the school that he goes to. There's a Minnesota Two-Spirit Society, and he's immersed in all of this. And at the same time, he's afraid to go home for visits because he doesn't know how people are going to receive him. And then, as communities do, as the good people that are in their communities who are doing the work, a lot of my friends are social workers. And it's great to know, like, all of us are social workers on here too. That I think that happened by chance, right, Lenny? Not on purpose, but our communities evolve and we grow. And so in the last few years, I've been seeing a lot more Two-Spirit events pop up. We just had a Two-Spirit celebration in Oneida, and I think it was June. We had a Two-Spirit walk in the Menominee community this past summer. And there's even talks about creating a Two-Spirit group at the Menominee High School. And we're from both communities. So, it's just that having that visibility and having our community have events that support our young people who identify, I think that is just one very important way that we as a community can support our youth. And of course, we need money to do those things as well. So money. We need money to bring those events, to pay our workers, to pay people to come in and talk. And I was very proud of my son too. At our Oneida event, he was asked to be on a panel. And thanks to Lenny, he had already had experiences for being on panels. And so he was very comfortable with just hopping in and doing that. And so that, I think that's just one, and then I'll be quiet so others can share other ways of how community can can support and be there for our young people.
Thank you, Cary. Lisa.
Oh, when my son came out, he was attending like a immersion school, which had like a very small population, but he wanted to go to school wearing women's clothing, wearing makeup, painting his nails. We had to make sure that, it was safe. So we let the school know what was going on. The school was very supportive. And when I had talked about how my son was getting physically assaulted, actually, like one of his teachers was a former boxer and just like, no one's gonna hurt our baby. And he would escort my son all throughout the school, just, in protection. But in just evolving and working with not only the school, we reached out to a spiritual advisor who also identifies as 2Spirit, who was brought in and did teachings with not only the students, but the staff as well. That was immensely helpful and powerful. The community began like a support group, and that was pretty awesome and powerful, where it wasn't just the school, it was the community. And how, everyone was coming together, and people were even traveling from other reservations like 2 or 3 hours away once they heard about, like we're meeting like twice a week. Unfortunately, my husband couldn't be on today because he's also a professor, but at that time he was also the legal director of the tribe and had a lot of, like, I guess, opportunity to work on like the policies and the laws of the tribe, not only of the school, but just the, like tribal statutes as well. So during the community meetings, we asked like, what is the need? And he just would get to work on changing the policies and the laws as well. And I think if I wish he were here, but I think because of that, they expanded marriage to not just man and woman. If they wanted to go through like the tribal court, anyone could apply for marriage. But it's even just the small things like that. We think they're small, but they do bring out big changes, especially when it comes policy wide. And like, this is how we operate, and this is what, like the expectations of how to be a good human when you're working for the tribe. That was pretty significant. And I just think it brought a lot of more awareness of how to create safety for our youth. Because of what we were going through with a son, it was really interesting. And I, at the time, was working in tribal child welfare. So I knew all the kids on the reservation, but it was just interesting to see like how many would come out and would talk to me specifically about it. And it was really sad to see like how many of those who would talk to me as a social worker, or even just as a kind of like auntie, would say that they can't tell their parents that they didn't have the safety. So I would educate them, like, you go with your gut and you do what is right for you. And if you ever need to talk, you can talk to me. If we feel that you need something, other than me, I will be your auntie to help you find those resources. And so it's just treating each other as relatives and really focusing on the safety of the youth, because not everyone has families that they can talk to or be open with, or to come out and just be themselves. So those are my points, I would say.
Thank you, Lisa. And I'm glad that you brought that up, because I think a lot of people don't realize that when same-sex marriage was passed in 2015, here in the US. Everybody assumed that it was straight across the board, and it wasn't. I always tell people I was happy for a minute and then I was sad afterwards, because I knew that my friends who identified would not be able to get married within their own tribal communities. So if you think about it, we have what, over 570 some tribes here in the United States. Currently, there's only 30 plus tribes that allow same-sex marriage. And if we think about colonization, before colonization, our two-spirit people were already getting married, right? So that's something to think about. And I'm glad that you brought that up, Lisa, because even just those small things creates a big change. So like in South Dakota, you know, the Oglala Sioux tribe was the first tribe in South Dakota that passed same-sex marriage. And then there's other tribes following. And that was the work of, you know, Muffy and Philippa, who are a two-spirit female couple who just work diligently to change things in South Dakota. So we have so much to change. Also, too, the thing that really frustrates me too is that when I hear of tribal communities that allow same-sex marriage, they also don't talk about it, right? So what's the reasons why they don't talk about it? I mean, why do they not put it out in the open? I mean, is there some opinions? Is there some, you know, so it's a lot to think about, right? But I do have to say, even when I started doing this work over 10 years ago, I've seen quite a change. It's small changes, but it's happening. So I mean, that's what I'd like to say. So again, sorry about that. Angie, I'll repeat the questions again. As a community, how do we help our youth who identify as two-spirit or Native LGBTQ? How can we better serve them? And how do we create safety for these youth?
So I think, so one of the things that I really, that I think about quite often actually is, you came to DHS and you did a training and talked about how before European contact, you know, tribes had many genders, you know, and that was normal. And it was a thing. And, you know, it wasn't even, you know, disputed. And how colonized we've become to just see two genders. And it's incorporated within a lot of our ceremonies. We have roles for genders, but again, it's only two genders. And I think just, you know, decolonizing our minds and being, you know, asking if we don't know how to include other genders, or if there is a specific, maybe there isn't a specific, you know, for this gender or that gender, maybe everybody, you know, does a specific role, but to ask those questions, ask ourselves. And also I do, you know, I think we can all, you know, well, I shouldn't say that. I believe that cultures are meant to evolve, and we do hold on to the old ways really tight because, you know, they were taken away, right? And so, I mean, we're just hanging on, but I do think we are meant to evolve. And so if we don't know, if there's somebody who's alive that doesn't know where where all the genders fit in, then, you know, we should figure out a way to include it and to bring it in, because that's the reality of our people today. We have people today, I believe we've always had people of multiple genders, but certainly we do today. And, you know, we need to have a good space for all of our relatives to be included in all of our ceremonies and how we talk about genders and roles and everything like that.
Thank you, Angie. Georgette.
Can I just say ditto? You know, I think, how do we help them identify and better serve youth who identify. I think we as adults, I think we as, you know, the people that work in the community, the people that are on tribal council and tribal court, I think we need to start having those conversations, right? What does our community need? How do we help our youth? You know, and I don't know, here in the cities, we have, you know, Pride Month, we have different, you know, events during Pride Month. But do the tribal communities have any of that? Do they recognize that? You know, and as far as like policies and procedures, you know, tribal sovereignty, you can create whatever you need to create to keep your tribal community safe and healthy, including our Two-Spirit youth, our LGBTQ kids. But you got to talk about it. You got to recognize it. You got to acknowledge it, or else the suicides continue. The mental health issues continue. It's you know, and Lenny, I know you've done a lot with going across the country, you know, doing trainings, but it would be nice to know what kind of follow-up communities have. You know, are communities asking their LGBTQ kids, what do you need? Even the parents, what do you need? And sometimes we don't know what we need, right? But we got to talk about it. We have to start that conversation. Yeah, it would be, I just think that we as adults and as the helpers of the community need to lead that charge. And we need to bring that, you know, our kids in on what do you need? What do you need from us? Thanks.
Thanks, Georgette. Well, I think one of the things, because I do know a lot of social workers, but one of the things that, you know, as a presenter and going across Indian country, one of the questions that I've always gotten from social workers is, how do you know when a child's coming out? So one of the things, how I would respond to that is, well, if that child is not in a safe space, that child is not going to come out. If you have adults around them who are using homophobic slurs against maybe community members or family members who identify, that child's not going to come out. That child is going to develop mental health issues because that child is going to begin to hate themselves. They're going to suffer from depression, anxiety. So this is where we as adults, because I always say our people mean well. I know that our people take in a lot of children into like foster care or adoption, or, you know, but I always say our people mean well. They want to help our young people. But if you have your own biases, that child is not going to be in a safe space. So I'm really glad that, you know, that we're having this conversation, because we need to think about those things, right? So before we move on to the final questions, I just want to remind the audience that if you have any questions that you'd like to ask the panelists, please put your questions in the Q&A box, and then, because we're going to have a few minutes of answering any questions. So with the following question, I think a lot of you already answered that, but any more that you would like to say on it? So what are some ideas of how tribes can help our youth? Any laws, policies? And then finally, what would you tell parents of youth who are coming out? Cary?
Well, Lisa touched on the marriage law. That's the first one that comes to mind, because Oneida Nation amended ours in 2015, I think it was. and included wording like spouses. So before it was husband and wife, man, woman type of thing. And so I remember when that happened and I was like, that stuff is published in our paper. And I remember when I first read the original one, I was like, what's going on? And so even before my son came out to me, I was really aware of and, noticing things. But then, like I said, our communities are doing the work and sometimes we don't see the work that they're doing, and then they amended it. And so that was really good. And that's really the only one I can think of right now. But I would just say, like, if you are a policy maker and you're discussing policies, making policy decisions that entails, that has implications for our Two-Spirit youth, make sure that you are consulting with our Two-Spirit youth. I'm really grateful that you have these panels, Lenny, the youth panels. I mean, you've had Ryan involved since back when we did the first one and that you asked him to be involved in the first one at Hamline. And I think that was 2017 or 18. And I'm sure you've done that before, but I mean, make sure our youth's voices are heard. They're our teachers. That colonized Western way of viewing children is you're the property of us, and we know all, the adults know all, when it's the exact opposite in the way that I was raised and believe. And as far as the children coming straight from the creator's world, it's like they have so much knowledge, they are knowledge holders, and so we need to consult with them too, and making sure that we're considering them in big decisions that we're making. And I know it impacts a lot of things like tribal enrollment. There's a lot of discussions on tribal enrollment, and coming from a matrilineal society, in my community, there's, I don't know if there's going to be a decision happening at all, but I know there was something thrown around about, enrollment based on your the matrilineal line, and so that could have some implications, impact on Two-Spirit individuals as well. So just considering when making big policy decisions. One thing that I would like, was the other question something about what I would like to share with parents? Okay, so I've been approached by, several parents who, have come to me and told me a young person in my life has come out to me, what do I do? And the first thing that I tell them is, love and support them 100%. Our children are smart and brilliant, and they're gonna feel your energy if you don't. And for me, in our relationship, my sons and I like I said, I supported him 100%. It wasn't perfect afterwards, but like he knew that he could come to me and we had that relationship. And so, and like I think Lisa said too, if somebody doesn't support my children, they're not going to be a part of our life. And so I told my son, I'm walking away from anybody who doesn't support you, because you are number one. So there's that. I also I made this decision too, because when we talk about our kids in the past tense from when they're little, right? What do you do? How do you refer to them? I refer to Ryan as Ryan, and my baby boy and he. And you know what? There's pictures that I don't even need to take a new picture, because a lot of his pictures when he was little, he presents as a boy. And so, he would swim in swimming trunks. When he was real little, it was swimming trunks. And so I always refer, I had a son, my baby boy, my son Ryan, when he was 2 years old. It's like that, and it's normal. And when I tell people who don't know, I tell them normal, like in a normal tone, nothing like it's Ryan, it's Ryan now, and he identifies as he, him, his. And it's just straight up like that. It's as normal as can be. It's not anything like, I don't have a negative tone or anything. It's just, this is the fact. This is it. If you like it, if you support it, great. If not, then you're not part of our life. That's just been my experience, and I'll pass it on. Thank you.
Thanks, Cary. Lisa.
I was always giving the teaching that we are spiritual beings having a human experience. So whenever I myself am going through hardships, or I see that my son is having hardships, or even if my son is really kind of struggling, as I talked about, like he feels like he has to be a certain way in order for his dad to accept him. We just go back to those teachings, like how wonderful it is that Creator made you, Creator made me. And before we even came to Earth or like have this human experience, we made this agreement that we're going to walk through this life together. We're going to experience these things together, and we're going to find ways to grow our spirit from this. So it kind of gives like a different perspective. So when, you know, like things are hitting hard, and instead of being like, why me, or why is this happening? We switch our thinking like, okay, what is it that we need to learn from this? Or what is the gift of growth that we're supposed to get and receive? And how do we get through this with that mindset? So I would just advise parents to kind of develop that as well. I know all tribal teachings are different, but it's also a way to validate to my children, like you're perfect. And it's my job as a parent and as a mom to shift around you and to accept you. You be you, and I'm going to support you. And I will always be your mama bear. So I will have to slay when I have to slay. We'll burn bridges when we have to burn bridges. I got this. We got each other.
Thank you, Lisa. Angie.
Can you ask the question one more time,
Sure.
just to make sure I get all of it?
So what are some ideas of how tribes can help our youth to identify in regards to like policy, laws to protect? And also, what would you tell parents of youth coming out?
Well, so the laws to protect, I think just incorporating safety of two-spirit people, well, and all people within any of the, tribal laws in all communities. Like you said earlier, talking about it, even, like there's a few stores that have the single bathroom, and having it be called an all gender bathroom, like that makes a lot of sense. And it really is an all gender bathroom, just being open to any kind of feedback of how to make even the spaces that we have be, more welcoming to everybody. And then what I would tell parents, just, echoing, especially Lisa, right before me, is, that's your child, that's your baby. And even though the times, might get rough at certain points, just being, I got your back, let's get through this together, following their lead on, how they want to deal with things, being, having courage, even when it's, when you need to deal with a scary situation, such as bullying. I mean, we've experienced that too. And just really listening and being 100%, the one person that your child can go to be safe.
Thank you, Angie. Georgette.
I'm going to agree with what all the moms said, but I'm going to go back to that we as communities, we as adults, as helpers, need to start this process, need to start the conversations. We need to start talking with kids. We need to be aware, right? And I think there's a question in the Q&A, Lenny, about how do you go about getting your tribal law or policy changed? And I worked in the tribal community for about 8 years. And for me, it was really about relationships. It was about relationship with your chief, with your tribal council, with those people that had your tribal judges, tribal attorneys, and child welfare. It's like you plant those seeds, right? And it's about relationships. It's about bringing your questions, your concerns, your personal story, if you have a child that identifies, to these people, and create that conversation, that discussion around, this is what can be better for our youth. You know, how do we help them identify, how do we serve them better? I mean, as far as your tribal statutes, your tribal law policies, I think adding in that population, adding the language to add them, to be inclusive, right? But I can't help, the two words that are coming to my mind is, you know, relationships, help push this stuff forward, move it forward, conversations to happen. And I totally forgot my second word, just like that, in a blink of an eye. But it's really about, and as adults, as helpers in these communities, giving grace to one another, right? To talk about this, to be wrong, to learn, and to be respectful, you know, of how we move forward with creating this conversation with these programs. How do we approach our youth? You know, give grace, you know, think of our 7 teachings when we move forward in all of this. So that's all.
Thank you, Georgette. So before we move on, I just want to see if any of the panelists had any follow-up to the question that was asked in the Q&A box. If not, do you have anything that you would like, any closing remarks that you would like to say to the audience before we leave?
I think I also worked for tribes, and as I said, my husband was like the legal director. So I've seen a lot, but I think community members have a lot of power, especially if they come in numbers. And if they do a lot of research, and especially about, you know, like suicidal rates, coming to tribal councils with an informed, you know, like plan or request, or with a lot of research as to how this can better not only the community, but, you know, the tribal government as well. And I think it's also just really important, like tribal council, they're politicians. So there's a politics game. And when it comes to election time, just start asking those questions. There's a lot of times there's forums like, you know, how would you support the 2Spirit or LGBTQ plus in the community? And are you opposed to, you know, like any laws or legislation or codes or statutes that would support and be inclusive to, you know, the LGBTQ plus community? I just think starting from there is how it is done. But a lot is just trying to convince tribal council, because it's usually tribal council who then directs like their legal department to move ahead as well.
Thank you, Lisa. Anyone else? Cary or Angie?
I'm just
I don't
thinking,
know that-
oh, sorry.
Go first.
Just quickly, You know, Lenny, you've met my great auntie up there, right? You remember her? I've, been told that she has a lot of influence and so, she's a big supporter. She came to your conference that you had, she was on that walk. And so I think when we have elders who are looked up to in our community, they have a lot of influence too. So I know maybe they're not all in that situation, but it's just really, it's really wonderful to have elders in one of my communities. I'm from couple different communities, but having elders in that community have our back, have my son's back, who says she's super proud of Ryan. And when the COVID hit, her and her daughters were making pride masks for him and just, to have that support, that intergenerational support and love, that's who we are supposed to be. So that's what I will end with. Thank you.
Yeah, I don't have a lot to add. Just remember, our youth are our youth. It's all of us. We're all related. We are, even if you're not a Native person, all of our youth belong to all of us. And it's our responsibility to do what we can to make our society a safe place for them to be who they are meant to be. The Creator makes our children perfect, exactly who they're supposed to be. And we need to do what we can to support them.
Thank you so much. I just have the most respect for all you parents and what you're doing to help your child and just helping community. And I do have to do a follow-up with what Angie said earlier. One of the things that I've seen organizations do, and even just Native organizations, simply is creating a gender neutral bathroom. I love the fact that, in 2015, when at that time I was the chairman of the Minnesota 2Spirit Society, and we had an incident happen at a powwow. And this organization was the first to even create a policy to protect in the protection of non-discrimination of individuals who identified as Two-Spirit. But even having the art gallery in Minneapolis actually create gender neutral bathrooms in the Dakota and Ojibwe language. So again, just these small things that organizations can do can be really helpful in and inclusion of individuals and youth who identify. So again, thank you. And I love the fact too, Cary, that you brought up the elders in our community. Our elders can be so supportive. They know. And that's why I'm always encouraging people go and talk with our elders in the community, because they know, they hold knowledge, right? So with that, I think we are going to prepare to close. I just want to say thank you to all of the presenters. You all are great colleagues, but most of all, really great relatives and friends of mine. So thank you again. So with that, what I will do is I will ask Whirlwind to take us out in the closing.